And what I like to tell some students that have problems with things like run-on sentences and fragments is to take the Hemingway approach and just writing short, sweet sentences, and makes the you sort of eliminate that problem of really long words and and overcomplicating kind of sentences, and it's an easy fix to to fix the errors that you have if you just consider his style and the way that he writes. Um, but let's go ahead and move on and finish up. So again, he was talking about the girls. Again, his alienation is sort of in his cynicism. He's very cynical, and um, he's really again affecting him and the way that he is with people. And again, there's a lot that's actually happening in his head that you could talk about as far as conflict is concerned. So again, you could read through some of that stuff and kind of make your interpretation about that. We'll start talking about his mom. One morning after he had been home about a month, his mother came into his bedroom and sat on the bed. She smoothed her apron. "I had a talk with your father last night, Harold," she said, "and he's willing for you to take the car out on the evenings." "Yeah," said Krebs, who was not fully awake. "Take the car out? Yeah." "Yes, your father has felt for some time that you should be able to take the car out in the evenings whenever you wished, but we only talked about it over last night." "I'll bet you made him," Krebs said. "No, it was your father's suggestion. We talked the matter over." "Yeah, well, I'll bet you made him." Krebs sat up in the bed. "Will you come down for breakfast, Harold?" his mother said. "As soon as I get my clothes on," Krebs said. His mother went out of the room, and he could hear her frying something downstairs while he washed, shaved, and dressed to go down the dining room breakfast. While he was eating breakfast, his sister brought in the mail. "Well, Hare," she said, "you old sleepyhead, what do you ever get up for?" Krebs looked at her. He liked her. She was his best sister. "Have you got the paper?" he asked. She handed him the Kansas City Star. So, again, the Kansas City Star, and contextual, Hemingway wrote for the Kansas City Star. And she shucked off its brown wrapper and opened it for the sporting page. He folded the Star open and popped it against the water pitcher with his cereal dish to steady it so he could read while he ate. So, his mom starts talking about how not to mess up the paper or anything like that. Um, and he starts talking to his sister, and his sister's telling him about how he could be her boo. And then there's nothing insensual about it or anything like that. If it might sound like that, but she's just her little sister, and her little, and if there is any type of character within this particular short story that he sort of has, any feelings of kindness, or any feelings um, of likeness to anybody, it's his sister, right? And his sister's, and there's a lot of dialogue here that's between him and his sister. It's like, "Do you love me?" "Uh-huh." "Will you always love me?" "Sure." "Will you come over and watch me play indoor?" "Maybe." "Oh, Harry, you don't love me. If you love me, you'd want to come over and watch me play indoor." Even though there's this exchange in dialogue, he's sort of like, I don't know if you could, I don't have a little sister, but I would assume that maybe, it's, she's sort of the little sister that kind of getting into things all the time, and you have these little exchanges, but nothing else but that, right? She's just your little sister. So Krebs' mother came into the dining room from the kitchen. She carried a plate with 2 fried eggs. "You run along, Helen," she said. "I want to talk to Harold." She put the eggs down in front of him and brought a jug of maple syrup. I wish you'd put down that paper a minute, Harold, she said. Krebs took down the paper and folded it. Have you decided what you're going to do yet, Harold? His mother said, taking off her glasses. No, said Krebs. Don't you think it's about time? His mother did not say it in a mean way. She seemed worried. I hadn't thought about it, Krebs said. God has some work for everybody to do, his mother said. There can be no idle hands in his kingdom. I'm not in his kingdom, Krebs said. We are all of us in his kingdom. Krebs felt embarrassed and resentful as always. I've worried about you so much, Harold, his mother went on. I know the temptations you must have been exposed to. I know how weak men are. I know what your own dear grandfather, my own father, told us about the Civil War, and I've prayed for you. I prayed for you all day long, Harold. Krebs looked at his bacon fat hardening on his plate. Your father is worried too, his mother went on. He thinks you've lost your ambition, that you haven't got any definite aim in your life. Charlie Simmons, who's just your age, has a good job and is going to be married. The boys are all settling down. They're all just determined to get somewhere. You can see that all the boys like Charlie Simon aren't on their way to being really a credit to the community. Krebs said nothing. Don't look that way, Harold, his mother said. You know we love you and we want to tell you for your own good how matters stand. Your father doesn't want to hamper your freedom. He thinks you should be allowed to drive the car. If you want to take the car and take some nice girls riding with you, we're only all too pleased. We want you to enjoy yourself, but you are going to have to settle down to work, Harold. Your father doesn't care what you start in at. All work is honorable, as he says, but you've got to make a start at something. He asked me to speak to you this morning, and then you can stop in and see him at his office. Is that all? Krebs said. Yes, don't you love your mother, dear boy? No, Krebs said. His mother looked at him across the table. Her eyes were shining, and she started crying. I don't love anybody, Krebs said. It wasn't any good. He couldn't tell her. He couldn't make her see it. It was silly to have said it. He had only hurt her. He went over and took hold of her arm. She was crying with her head in her hands. I didn't mean it, I said. I was just angry at something. I didn't mean I didn't love you. His mother went on crying. Krebs put his arm on her shoulder. Can't you believe me, Mother? His mother shook her head. Please, please, Mother, believe me. Look at how he uses mother, right? Please, Mother. All right, his mother said chokily. She looked at him. I believe you, Harold. Krebs kissed her hair. She put her face up to him. I'm your mother, she said. I held you next to my heart when you were a tiny baby. Krebs felt sick and vaguely nauseated. Again, this nausea is the same type of nausea that he sort of feels as well when he's telling the lies. When he feels, when he's talking about the girls and sort of, those emotions that he has also. Krebs felt sick and vaguely nauseated. I know, Mummy. He says Mummy here, which is, again, a total departure from what he was saying and Mom. So, again, that part will be something that you might want to look at. Why would he say Mummy there? Right? He had been referring to her as mother, and then here Mummy. I'll try to be a good boy for you. Sort of like he's changing his mood and obviously his mom sort of treats him like a little boy, and he sort of seems and resembles a little boy with those, with that dialogue. They knelt down beside the dining room table, and Krebs' mother prayed. Now you pray, Harold, she said. I can't, Krebs said. Try, Harold. I can't. Do you want me to pray for you? Yes. So his mother prayed for him, and then they stood up, and Krebs kissed his mother and went on to the house. He had tried to keep his life from being complicated. Still, none of it had touched him. He had felt very sorry for his mother, and she had made him lie. Well, he would go on to Kansas City and get a job, and she would feel all right about it. So here we have we're sort of told what happened at the end, but we're not told everything, and it's still it's cool because we're sort of left with what the hell happened to the guy, right? He would go to Kansas City and get a job, and he would find out all right about it. There would be one or more scenes maybe before he got away. So they had a couple of other maybe arguments or something. He would not go down to his father's office. He would miss that when he wanted his life to go smoothly. had just gotten going that way. Well, that was all over now anyway. He would go over to the schoolyard and watch Helen play indoor baseball. All right. So, so again, we have a couple of relationships that you can talk about with the mother and him. And again, with Hemingway, God is dead. So you definitely see this here in Soldier's Home. It doesn't exist for him. He's, I guess at this point, he's an atheist, and he can't convince himself that to pray. And again, if you look at Krebs and maybe as a character, and sort of talk about him as a character, even though we don't know a lot about his past, just with that simple passage at the very end, with him enlisting in a Methodist church, with him being in a fraternity, with him with that picture at the beginning where we're sort of told about his past a little bit, and how he considers his time in Europe, and how he much prefers his time in Europe than coming back home. We are able to infer a little bit about him as a character, and whether or not he is either a round character, a static character, a dynamic character, or just a one-dimensional character. And you can make your argument for any one of those because, again, given that he started in a Methodist school, in a religious school, you'll see, at the end that that's not a part of what he is anymore. So that's interesting in itself. A few notes that I actually put off here on the side as well. It's a story about disillusionment. He is the anti-hero, and it's not glorious. He's emotionally numb. Again, there's a lot of cynicism in this particular story, as you'll find in Hemingway. There is no romance, even when his sister tries to incite that romanticism in him and his relationship with his sister. He doesn't have it. I mean, it's not within him. So that could be something that you could contrast maybe with Marjorie and Nick and the end of something, right? So there are some things that you could tie together and maybe expound on. Again, post-traumatic stress was not something that was studied back then. This was at the advent of maybe when people started realizing that there were veterans that were coming back that had problems, emotional things going on. He tells lies about the war to glorify it. It's definitely anti-war literature that we're reading here with A Soldier's Home. And those are the only notes I had. But again, there's a lot to be said about this particular short story, and as it relates to Hemingway and his style. I mean, again, although this sort of story is not something that is unheard of now, in the 20s and considering the time that Hemingway wrote the story, there weren't a lot of people that were talking about this. I'm not going to say that Hemingway was the only person or the only writer that was talking about this, but I think at this time when soldiers were coming home, this alienation that a lot of them seem to come back with, and this period of adjustment that it took for them to come back into a society, took a toll on a lot of people. And again, you might say that it may be contextually representative of Hemingway. But again, you'll formulate your argument on that in your paper if you're going to be doing the contextualized version. But there's a lot of, with this particular story, maybe less so than the others. There is not a lot of imagery stuff that you might be able to find per se. Although I don't really want to say that, because I mean, with Hemingway, you read him a few times and you'll find something. I think most of it you'll find at the beginning when they're talking about the picture and they're talking about him in his former self, and the narration that occurs beforehand, before all the dialogue kind of sort of comes into place. Um, I think you'll find the imagery there, but again, a lot of this is sort of tied to his cynicism and post World War I sentiments, um, and alienation that occurs with a lot of the veterans that were coming home from war. Um, so again, there's a lot to be talked about with the Soldiers Home. As you know, I think a lot can be said for prompt number one if you're going to be talking about characterization, because Krebs is again, you could make a point for him being, aside from maybe a one-dimensional character. I don't know whether or not he's a one-dimensional character. But you could argue any of those. Um, but I hope this helped, and I'll be posting these as soon as I get, well, as soon as this is over. Then I will see you guys on our next class period. So I hope you liked it.